Hi everyone, let me try and finish off my talk on interaction. So where were we last time? Well, we were looking at navigation, selection, and changing over time. We looked at Gapminder, which is that change over time for incomes versus the number of years of the average life expectancy. Selection, we looked at how we can select different things and how that actually changes. We also looked at selection in Gapminder. We also looked at navigation with Google Maps and how this all sort of fits together. But let's look at attribute reduction. So what we're going to be looking at is how one slices, how one cuts, and what's projection. We've looked at projections before as well. That would be something like multidimensional scaling or principal component analysis. And you can actually manipulate and change those over time. Slicing is normally the idea that you are keeping the data. You are just making a slice through your data, like a CT scan would be a slice of the data. The rest of the data is there. You're just showing a particular slice. A cut is actually you remove the layer. So oftentimes with a slice, it might be that's probably not the best example. A slice would normally be I would see both sides of it, or I would see all the parts of the slice still, but I'd see where the slice actually occurs. Versus a cut, I'm removing everything. Everything above the ceiling is removed for a slice. Versus for a cut. For a slice, I keep things, so I can slice it open and see all the various sides. And projection is something like multidimensional scaling. So if I have a high dimensional space, I have a whole bunch of points, and I want to put it onto two-dimensional space, it's a projection. It is reducing the number of attributes I'm seeing at one time down to a flat surface. Now, you could also say a slice, so this is a sort of a spatial slice. A slice could be I am looking at part of my data set and the attributes associated with that one, some of the attributes associated with that data set, reducing the number of attributes I see. A cut would just be I'm only showing the one part, some of the attributes, and just removing the rest. And then we already looked at this BenFry Visualization with zip codes. I just really like it in terms of how one does a dynamic query and how one filters. So I like pointing out, this is going to be relatively quick, I guess. One of the things I like pointing out about interaction, and we'll look at interaction a bit more soon, but it's not foolproof. There are actual costs to it. So not only from a technological standpoint, implementing this thing, but interactions also give you other problems. So you can essentially have one person at a time using it. Multiple people interacting with a data set at the same time leads to disaster. Okay, so you can have everyone else watch while one person drives. At that point in time, the other person watching is getting nothing better out of the data, or very little out of the data comparatively. A static visualization is almost as good at that point because they are not driving things. If you show them a bunch of static visualizations instead of just the one, they can sort of make a little bit more out, but the act of interacting with the data is actually where a lot of the power comes from. One of the things that they found with EM Dialogue, so this is for Emily Carr. It's a dialogue about Emily Carr. It's a visualization that was made for Vancouver Art Gallery, I do believe. And no, it was Calgary, I do believe. I know the person actually did the work, but let me have a quick show of what this actually looks like. So the idea here is you're representing Emily Carr's life and some of the works that she did over the years, using a tree stump as a metaphor. So the further out of the rings of the tree you are, the older Emily Carr would be, or the year it would be. Okay, and you'd have quotes from Emily Carr. You'd have paintings. You would have who she was related to at any given time, but based off of chronology away from the center point where she was born. So like the rings of a tree. So this is the metaphor that they're using because it's very, natural world, very much like Emily Carr's work. Okay, that's all well and good. So this was an installation piece for an art gallery showing Emily Carr's work. So it was just to help people get a sense of where Emily Carr was. It's not Emily Carr's art. It's just it's a visualization to help people be informed about her artwork. Interesting thing about this though, when they actually went to the art gallery and saw people using it, they actually sat down, took notes while people went up to the Emily Carr, went up to the exhibit and were playing around with it. And they kept on noticing people not using it, especially if anyone else was around. And that's where they learned some really interesting things about interaction. One of the interesting things they learned about interaction was people do, I know, crazy, people don't like looking dumb. I know, it's very strange. My son's talking, hopefully you don't hear that. So if you have an interaction and everybody else is looking at you, you get a little embarrassed, especially if you've never used it before. If I have something static, like at a mall, when I'm seeing the floor plan of the mall, if it was interactive, if things were moving around, I wouldn't touch that thing. I don't want everyone else to know what I'm looking for, what store I'm looking for, or that I don't know how to use the interface. But if it's static, if it's just a solid poster, I can spend my sweet time looking there and pretend that I'm just looking at multiple places, right? That's sort of the point, or that point I'm trying to make, is that interaction, you have the possibility of looking dumb. It's one person at a time, so it actually is a bottleneck in terms of interactivity. And another thing is, oftentimes, if you don't have something consistent, if you don't have context, you can get lost. So Tamara Munster calls this desert fog effect. So if you do not remember what you looked at last time or where you were, and you navigate further in, or you change what you're looking at in the data, and you don't know how to go back to where you were before, you don't have any sort of context of where you are, what's surrounding you. You might not remember what you were doing last time. And ultimately, this is not the designer's vision. Ultimately, if you have an interactive visualization, all visualizations, all design is up. It's a sort of this weird interaction between the designer makes it one way, thinking people will use it in a particular way. That's their mental model. And what people actually do with it is a very different thing. It's even more extreme with an interactive visualization. Because you have that interactivity, the designer's original vision for how this thing gets used might be completely different from how it's actually used. So with all that being said, interactivity gives you something that you couldn't get otherwise, but there are costs and there are things to watch out for, especially this getting lost thing. A lot of times we assume one person at a time. We assume that you have all the time in the world to look at the visualization. You're not in the public eye. Those only affect people when there's multiple people at a time or it's out in public. But the getting lost thing applies to everybody. So it's very easy to design interaction incorrectly. Okay. With that being said, I'm going to stop the video here. And when we come back next time, I do believe we're looking at views and facets of data. Stay tuned.